The dust kicked up around Kellan Bryant's worn boots as he stood at the edge of town watching the stagecoach arrive, knowing his last hope rode inside that creaking wooden box on wheels. And when the door opened to reveal a young Chinese woman in silk-embroidered clothing clutching a small leather bag, he felt his stomach drop because she looked nothing like the sturdy farm wife he had desperately needed to save his failing ranch. It was late summer in 1882, and Salida, Colorado had become a town of whispers and sideways glances ever since the railroad brought people from all corners of the world to this mountain valley, where the Arkansas River carved through towering peaks. Kellan had placed an advertisement for a bride in 3 different newspapers, describing his land and his needs with brutal honesty, because he had no time left for pretty lies. The bank would foreclose in 4 months. His cattle were dying from a disease he could not afford to treat, and his 2 remaining ranch hands had left last week when he could no longer pay their wages. The woman descended from the stagecoach with careful steps, her eyes scanning the crowd of rough miners and cowboys until they landed on him. He knew she was looking for him because he was the only man standing alone with a handwritten sign that read Bryant Ranch in letters that looked like a child had scrawled them. He was 26 years old and felt ancient, his father's death 2 years prior having loaded responsibilities onto his shoulders that he had never wanted. The ranch had been in his family since 1865, when his father had claimed the land after returning from a war that left him with nightmares and a desperate need for wide, open spaces. Mr. Bryant. Her voice carried an accent that made the words sound like music, and when she stood before him, he realized she was younger than he expected, maybe 22 or 23, with dark eyes that held an intelligence that made him feel exposed. That would be me. He reached for her bag, but she held it tighter, studying him with an expression he could not read. You must be Miss Han Lihua. I am Han Lihua. The advertisement said you had a cattle ranch that needed management and a home that needed a woman's touch. She spoke clearly, each word enunciated with precision that suggested she had worked hard to learn English. It did not mention that the ranch was dying or that you were desperate enough to marry a Chinese woman despite what your neighbors might say. Her bluntness caught him off guard, and for the first time in months he felt something other than the crushing weight of failure. I figured honesty could wait until you got here and decided whether to stay or take the next stage back to San Francisco. Honesty would have saved us both time, Mr. Bryant. She released her grip on the bag and let him take it, the weight surprisingly heavy for such a small piece of luggage. But I did not travel 3 weeks on trains and stage coaches to turn around without seeing what I came for. Show me this dying ranch. The wagon ride to his property took 40 minutes along a rutted road that climbed into foothills covered with pine trees and scrub oak. Lihua sat beside him in silence, her gaze moving across the landscape with an assessment that felt almost clinical. He found himself sneaking glances at her profile, wondering what circumstances had brought a Chinese woman to answer a mail-order bride advertisement from a failing rancher in Colorado. She wore her black hair pulled back in an intricate style he had never seen before, and her clothing looked expensive even to his untrained eye, the silk embroidered with tiny flowers and birds in threads that caught the afternoon light. You are staring, she said without turning her head. Sorry. I am just trying to figure out who you are. He flicked the reins to encourage the horses up a steep incline where the road narrowed between rocky outcroppings. I am a woman who needs a new life, and you are a man who needs help saving his land. That is all we need to know for now. She finally looked at him, and he saw something fierce in her expression that gave him a small flutter of hope. Tell me about the ranch. What is killing your cattle? He explained everything as they traveled, holding nothing back because she had asked for honesty and he had nothing left to lose. The disease had started 3 months ago with one sick cow that he had isolated too late. It spread through his herd of 200 cattle until he had lost nearly half, and the survivors were too weak to bring to market. His water sources were good, fed by mountain streams that never ran dry, but the grazing land had suffered from 2 years of sparse rainfall. His father had taken loans to expand the herd during good years, and those debts had come due at the worst possible time. The house needed repairs, the barn roof had holes, and his fences were falling apart because he had been working alone for weeks trying to do the job of 4 men. "How much land do you have?" Lihua asked, her attention focused on a distant ridgeline where his property began. 1,200 acres, most of it grazing land in the high meadows. Good timber stands on the north section, and the Arkansas River forms the southern boundary. He pointed toward a gap in the hills where his ranch buildings came into view. "My father chose this spot because the valley protects the winter pastures from the worst winds, and there is enough flat land near the house for growing hay and vegetables." The ranch buildings looked even more pathetic than he remembered as they approached. The main house was a 2-story log structure that his father had built with pride. But now several windows had cracked panes, and the front porch sagged on one end where a support post had rotted. The barn was larger, built to house 60 cattle during harsh winter storms, but the roof showed obvious damage and the doors hung crooked on failing hinges. Corrals and fences spread out from the barn in a pattern that had once been orderly, but now looked like the skeleton of something dying. Lihua climbed down from the wagon before he could offer assistance, her eyes moving from building to building with an expression he still could not interpret. She walked toward the house with purposeful steps, and he followed, suddenly aware of how filthy everything had become since he had been working alone. The front door stuck when he tried to open it, swollen from recent rains, and he had to put his shoulder into it before the door scraped open across the wooden floor. Inside, the house smelled of old smoke and loneliness. The main room held a stone fireplace his father had built with river rocks, a worn sofa that had belonged to his mother, and a kitchen area that occupied one corner with a cast iron stove and a dry sink. Dust covered every surface, and he realized with shame that he had not cleaned in weeks, too exhausted each night to do more than collapse into bed. Stairs led to the second floor where 3 bedrooms sat empty except for his own, which contained a narrow bed and a trunk of clothing. Lihua moved through the space with careful steps, touching surfaces and examining corners with a thoroughness that made him nervous. She opened cupboards in the kitchen and found them mostly bare except for some flour, coffee, and dried beans. She peered into the cold stove and ran her finger along the windowsill, leaving a track in the accumulated grime. When she finally turned to face him, her expression had softened slightly. "You have been alone for a long time," she said, and it was not a question. "My mother died when I was 12. My father passed 2 years ago from pneumonia, had 2 ranch hands until last week, but they were just hired help, not family." The words came out rougher than he intended, and he cleared his throat. "Look, I know this is not what you expected. The advertisement might have made things sound better than they are. If you want to go back to town, I will drive you first thing tomorrow and pay for your stage ticket back to wherever you came from." "Where would I go?" She set her bag on the dusty kitchen table and began unbuttoning the outer layer of her silk jacket. "Back to San Francisco, where I spent 6 months working in a laundry, barely earning enough to eat. Back to Guangdong, where my family sold me to a merchant who wanted a concubine. I came here because your advertisement offered something I have never had, a chance to build something of my own. This ranch is dying, but it is not dead yet." Kellan felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight band of despair that had been squeezing his lungs for months. "You are saying you will stay. I am saying I will look at your sick cattle tomorrow and decide if this place can be saved." She removed her jacket to reveal a simpler tunic underneath and began rolling up her sleeves with efficient movements. "Tonight I will cook us dinner and clean this kitchen because I cannot think in filth. You will bring me water from your well and tell me everything you know about raising cattle, which I suspect is less than you should know if half your herd is dead." Her words should have stung, but instead he felt a laugh building in his throat, the first real laugh in so long that it came out as a rusty bark. "You do not pull your punches, do you? Pulling punches is for people who have time to waste." She found a rag in one of the cupboards and examined it with distaste before setting it aside. "I need clean water, soap, and any vegetables you might have. Then you will show me where I will sleep, and we will establish the rules for this arrangement." He spent the next hour following her instructions, hauling water from the well and discovering a forgotten basket of potatoes in the root cellar behind the house. She found his mother's old soap stored in a cupboard and began cleaning with a ferocity that transformed the kitchen before his eyes. He watched her work, noticing the graceful economy of her movements, and the way she examined everything as if cataloging information for later use. When he showed her the bedroom that had belonged to his parents, she nodded approval at the larger bed and the window that faced east toward the mountains. "We will not share a room until we are properly married, and we will not be properly married until I decide this ranch can survive," she announced, setting her bag on the bed. "That gives us both time to determine if we can tolerate each other. I know you expected a wife immediately, but I will not tie myself to a sinking ship just because I traveled a long distance. That seems fair." He leaned against the doorframe, exhausted and oddly relieved. "What do you need from me? Information and honesty. Tomorrow you will show me everything. The sick cattle, the land, the water sources, all of it. Tonight you will eat the dinner I cook and tell me about yourself, your family, and why you love this ranch enough to marry a stranger to save it." She moved to the window and looked out at the mountains turning purple in the fading light. "And you will tell me the truth about how people in Salada will treat a Chinese woman living on this ranch." Dinner was a simple meal of potatoes fried with wild onions she found growing near the well, but it tasted better than anything Kellan had eaten in months. They sat at the kitchen table after she had scrubbed it clean, and he found himself talking more than he had talked to anyone since his father died. He told her about growing up on the ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, helping his father drive cattle to market in Denver. He described his mother's garden that had once flourished behind the house, and the way his father had taught him to read the weather by watching the clouds build over the mountains. When he got to the part about his neighbors, he did not soften the truth. "There are Chinese workers in Salada, mostly men who came to build the railroad and stayed to work in the mines. They live in their own section of town, and most folks leave them alone as long as they stay there. You being here with me, that is going to cause talk. Some of it will be ugly." "I've heard ugly talk before." She sipped the coffee he had made, strong and black the way he liked it. "In San Francisco, white men would spit when Chinese women walked past. They called us names I will not repeat, but I learned that ugly talk from small-minded people is just noise. It cannot hurt me unless I let it. It might be more than talk. My closest neighbor is a man named Thomas Reeves who has been trying to buy my land for 2 years. He has friends in town who could make trouble." Kellan wrapped his hands around his own coffee cup, feeling the warmth seep into his perpetually cold fingers. I need you to understand what you might be walking into. And I need you to understand that I did not come this far to be frightened away by men like Thomas Reeves. Her dark eyes met his across the table, and he saw steel beneath the delicate features. In Guangdong, my family was poor but respectable until my father died and left debts we could not pay. The merchant who bought me treated me like property until I stole enough money to escape to Hong Kong, then worked on a ship to San Francisco washing clothing for the crew. I have been frightened, Mr. Bryant. I have been hungry and cold and lost, but I am still here, and I do not give up easily. He found himself nodding, something like admiration growing alongside the desperate hope. Call me Kellan. If we are going to save this ranch together, we should probably use first names. Then you may call me Lihua. She stood and began clearing the dishes, her movements already comfortable in the space as if she had been there longer than a few hours. Now you will sleep, because tomorrow I need you strong enough to show me everything. We have 4 months before the bank takes this land, which means we have no time to waste. Kellan climbed the stairs to his small bedroom and lay in the dark listening to Lihua move around downstairs, her presence already changing the feel of the house. For the first time since his father died, he did not fall asleep feeling completely alone. Morning came with the sharp clarity of mountain air and the sound of someone moving around the kitchen. Kellan dressed quickly and found Lihua already outside, standing near the main corral where his remaining cattle clustered at a hay feeder. She wore simpler clothing today, dark pants and a tunic that looked more practical for ranch work, and her hair was braided in a single plait down her back. When he joined her, she pointed at the cattle without turning her head. Those 6 there, they are the sickest. She indicated a group of cows standing separate from the others, their ribs visible and their movements lethargic. Yes. I have been keeping them isolated, but they are not getting better. He climbed the fence rail and studied his animals with the familiar ache of failure. Lost 2 more last week. I have tried every remedy I know and nothing works. Lihua climbed the fence with surprising agility and dropped into the corral, walking toward the sick cattle with slow, non-threatening movements. The animals watched her but did not spook, and she approached the nearest cow with her hand extended. She examined the cow's eyes, nose, and mouth, then ran her hands over the animal's body with a gentleness that contrasted with her blunt manner. She repeated the process with 2 more sick cows before returning to climb back out of the corral. The symptoms looked like bovine tuberculosis, but it could also be pneumonia complicated by poor nutrition. She wiped her hands on a rag he offered. In Guangdong, water buffalo would get sick like this when the rains failed and the grass died. My uncle treated them with herbs and better food, and most survived. Your uncle raised water buffalo. Kellan felt a spike of interest that cut through his fatigue. My uncle was a farmer who understood animals better than people. He taught me many things before he died. She walked toward the barn and he followed. You said the disease started 3 months ago. What else changed 3 months ago? Weather, feed, anything? He thought back, trying to remember through the blur of exhausting days. We had a late spring snow that killed some of the early grass. I had to supplement with hay I bought from Reeves, and that was when the first cow got sick. He stopped walking as the realization hit. You think it was the hay? I think sick cattle need good food and clean water, and you have been too overwhelmed to provide either. Her tone was matter of fact rather than accusatory. Show me where you store the hay. The barn's interior was darker and cooler than outside, shafts of sunlight penetrating through holes in the roof to illuminate floating dust particles. He led her to the hay storage area, where several bales remained from his purchase from Reeves. Lihua pulled a section of hay from one bale and examined it closely, bringing it to her nose to smell. She pulled apart the dried grass, searching through the stems with careful attention. "This hay is moldy," she announced, holding up a clump that showed dark discoloration. "See these black spots? This is mold that can make cattle very sick. Did you check the hay when you bought it? Reeves delivered it at night and I was busy with calving. I just stacked it in here and started using it." Kellan felt stupid and angry at himself. "I should have checked." "Yes, you should have, but now we know, and knowing means we can fix it." She dropped the contaminated hay and brushed off her hands. "We need new feed, good hay or grain if you can afford it. The sick cattle need to be separated completely and given extra food and clean water. The healthy ones need better grazing, which means moving them to your high meadows where the grass is still good. I cannot afford new feed. I have maybe $30 left and I need that for basic supplies." He leaned against a support post, feeling the weight of impossibility crush down again. "Then we will find another way." Lihua walked back into the sunlight, her face tilted up as if consulting with the sky. "You said you have 1,200 acres. What else is on this land besides cattle?" He took her on a tour that lasted until midday, riding horses up into the high country where his property stretched across meadows and through pine forests. She asked questions constantly, about soil and water, wildlife and weather patterns. When they reached a section of old-growth timber on the north boundary, she made him stop and dismount. They walked among the massive pines, some of them 4 feet across at the base, and she examined them with the same thorough attention she had given everything else. "These trees are valuable," she said, running her hand over rough bark. "In San Francisco, lumber sells for good money because so much building is happening. You could harvest some of these trees and use the money to buy feed and medicine for your cattle." "I thought about that, but I have no way to harvest them and get them to a mill. I am one man with no crew and no equipment." He kicked at a pine cone, frustration bleeding into his voice. "Then we find people who do have equipment and negotiate a deal." She turned to face him, her expression determined. "Kellan, you have been thinking like a man with no options, so you have been missing the options in front of you. This ranch has resources: land, timber, water rights on the Arkansas River. What it lacks is management and labor. If I stay, I can provide management. But we need labor, which means we need to hire help. I told you, I have no money to hire help. We will offer partnership instead of wages." She started walking back toward the horses. "In San Francisco, Chinese laborers work for less money than white workers because they have fewer choices. There are skilled men in Salida who could help us if we offer them something better than mine wages. We find 2 or 3 good workers and offer them a share of the ranch profits once we are making money again. It is a risk for them, but less risk than dying in a mine collapse." The idea was so simple and so obvious that Kellan wondered why he had not thought of it himself. Probably because he had been too buried in despair to think creatively about anything. "Do you really think anyone would take that offer?" "I think men who have nothing will take a chance on something." She mounted her horse with practiced ease that surprised him. "But first you need to decide if you trust me enough to let me try. I am asking you to take risks with your land, to bring Chinese workers here where your neighbors will see them, to do business in ways that might make you uncomfortable. Can you do that?" Kellan looked at this woman who had appeared in his life less than 24 hours ago, this stranger who somehow saw possibilities where he had seen only failure. She sat on his father's old bay mare like she had been born in a saddle, waiting for his answer with patience that felt like a challenge. The smart choice would be to send her back to town and accept that his ranch was doomed. The brave choice was something different entirely. "Yes," he said, climbing onto his own horse. "I trust you to try." The next week passed in a blur of activity that left Kellan more exhausted than he had been doing everything alone, but it was a different kind of exhaustion, one that carried hope alongside the fatigue. Lihua transformed into a force of nature, organizing and planning with a precision that suggested she had been managing complex operations her entire life, rather than working in a San Francisco laundry. She sent Kellan into town with a carefully written list of supplies they could afford and instructions to ask specific questions about who might be interested in ranch work. While he was gone, she cleaned the entire house from top to bottom, repaired the sagging porch with timber she found stored behind the barn, and organized the kitchen with an efficiency that made him feel like an incompetent child when he returned. She had also done something he had not expected. She had butchered one of the dying cows, the meat carefully preserved and stored in the cold cellar, the hide stretched for tanning, and even the bones saved for making broth. "That cow was not going to survive," she explained when she saw his expression. "So she becomes food for us and material we can use. Nothing is wasted." Kellan had returned from town with supplies and information. There were 4 Chinese men working in the mines who were interested in hearing about ranch work, and the owner of the general store had mentioned a sawmill operation 20 miles north that might be interested in buying timber. He had also encountered Thomas Reeves on the main street, and that conversation had gone exactly as badly as he expected. "Heard you got yourself a Chinese mail-order bride, Bryant," Reeves had said loudly enough for half the street to hear. He was a thick man with a red face and small eyes that always looked calculating. "That is a new kind of desperate, even for you." "My business is my own, Reeves." Kellan had kept his voice level despite the anger building in his chest. "Your business becomes my business when you bring Chinese onto property that borders mine. I have been patient waiting for you to fail, but I will not have my land value decreased by having those people next door." Reeves had stepped closer, his breath smelling of whiskey even though it was barely noon. "Sell me your ranch now for a fair price, or I promise you will regret what comes next." Kellan had walked away without responding, but the encounter sat heavy in his stomach as he told Lihua about it that evening. They were sitting on the newly repaired porch, the mountain sunset painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and she listened without interrupting until he finished. "This man Reeves, he wants your land badly," she said, her voice thoughtful. "That means your land is worth more than you realize. Men like him do not threaten unless they are afraid of losing something valuable, or unless they have the power to make good on their threats." Kellan watched the light fade over the mountains. "Reeves has friends in the bank and friends in the town council. He could make our lives very difficult. Then we will succeed quickly and thoroughly, so he has no leverage against us." She stood and stretched, her movements graceful in the dimming light. "The 4 Chinese men from the mines, bring them here tomorrow. I will speak with them and see if any are worth hiring. And you will write a letter to the sawmill about the timber, offering them first choice of our trees in exchange for a good price and help with the harvest." The 4 men who rode out to the ranch the next day were all younger than Kellan expected, ranging from early 20s to perhaps 30. All of them lean and weathered from hard labor. Lihua spoke with them in rapid Chinese, a conversation that lasted almost an hour while Kellan waited, understanding nothing but able to read body language that suggested serious negotiation. When she finally turned back to him, she had a satisfied expression. "Wai and Chen will start tomorrow," she announced, indicating 2 of the men who looked to be in their mid-20s. Wai worked on his family's farm in Fujian and knows cattle. Chen was a carpenter before coming to America and can repair your barn. I offered them room in your bunkhouse, meals, and 10% of ranch profits to be split between them once we are earning again. They accepted, because working here is less dangerous than the mines, and because I promised them you would treat them fairly. Kellan looked at the two young men who would be his new employees and partners. Y was slightly built with calloused hands and a quiet demeanor. Chen was taller and broader, with a scar across his left cheek and eyes that assessed everything with professional interest. Both men watched him with expressions that mixed hope and wariness, and he realized they were taking as big a risk as he was. "Welcome to Bryant Ranch," he said, wishing he spoke Chinese so he could say more. "Lihua is right, I will treat you fairly. This place needs a lot of work, but if we can save it, there will be profit enough to share." Lihua translated, and both men nodded. Y said something in Chinese, and Lihua smiled, the first genuine smile Kellan had seen from her. "Y says your horses look healthy even if your cattle do not, which means you have good instincts you have not been applying correctly. He thinks we can fix the cattle problem." Over the next 3 weeks, the ranch began to transform. Chen worked on the barn with a skill that bordered on artistry, not just patching holes but reinforcing structures and improving drainage so water would not rot the wood again. Y took over care of the cattle with Lihua, and together they implemented a treatment program that involved separating the sick animals, improving their feed with grain Kellan had purchased using the last of his money, and nursing the weakest ones with hand feeding and medicinal herbs that Lihua seemed to know by instinct. Kellan found himself working harder than he had ever worked, but with a purpose that made the labor feel worthwhile. He cleared fence lines and repaired corrals, drove the healthy cattle up to the high meadows where good grass still grew, and began preparing for the timber harvest. The sawmill had responded to his letter with interest, offering to send a crew to mark the best trees and negotiate a price based on board feet. It was not the fortune he needed, but it was a start. He also found himself watching Lihua more than he should. She was always in motion, always solving some problem or planning the next step. She worked alongside Y and Chen without hesitation, her commands in Chinese sharp and clear. But in the evenings when the work was done and they sat together eating dinner at the kitchen table, she became someone different, quieter, more thoughtful, occasionally even playful. She asked him questions about his childhood and listened to his stories with attention that made him feel interesting. She told him bits and pieces of her own history, carefully chosen revelations that hinted at a harder life than he had imagined. One evening, about a month after she had arrived, they were walking back from checking on the cattle in the near pasture when she suddenly stopped and pointed at the sky. "Look, shooting stars." He followed her gaze and saw streaks of light across the darkening sky, meteors burning up in the atmosphere. They stood together in silence watching the celestial display, and he became acutely aware of how close she was standing, close enough that he could smell the scent of sage and smoke that clung to her from the evening fire. "In Guangdong, my grandmother said shooting stars were the spirits of ancestors checking on their families," Lihua said softly. "She would make wishes on them, asking for blessings." "What would you wish for now?" Kellan asked, surprised by how much he wanted to know the answer. She turned to look at him, her face barely visible in the starlight. "I would wish that we succeed, that this ranch survives and becomes a home instead of a burden, that the risks we are all taking turn out to be worth it." She paused, and he thought he saw something vulnerable flicker across her expression. "And I would wish that when you look at me, you see a partner and not just a tool to save your land." The words hit him harder than he expected, and he realized she was right. In his desperate focus on saving the ranch, he had been thinking of her as a solution rather than a person, as a means to an end instead of someone with her own hopes and fears. Lihua, I am sorry. You are right. You have done so much and I have been taking it for granted. I did not say it to make you apologize. She started walking again, back toward the lights of the house. I said it because we need to be honest with each other. You needed to marry to save your ranch, and I needed a new life. But if this arrangement is going to work, we need to be more than desperate people using each other. We need to become real partners, maybe even friends. I would like that, he said, catching up to walk beside her. And for what it is worth, when I look at you now, I see someone extraordinary. Someone who saw possibilities I was too defeated to imagine. Someone strong and smart and kind of terrifying in the best way. She laughed, a sound that rang out across the darkening valley. Kind of terrifying. I will take that as a compliment. The timber sale happened in mid-September, bringing a sudden influx of money that felt miraculous after months of poverty. The sawmill crew spent 2 weeks marking and cutting trees under Chen's supervision, and they paid fair prices that Kellan would not have known to negotiate if Lihua had not researched lumber values. With money in hand, they were able to buy proper feed for the cattle, hire a veterinarian from Denver to examine the sick animals and provide actual medical treatment, and purchase materials to finish repairing the ranch buildings. The veterinarian, an older man named Dr. Harrison, who smelled of carbolic acid and horse liniment, spent 2 days examining every animal on the property. His diagnosis confirmed what Lihua had suspected. Bovine pneumonia complicated by malnutrition and toxic mold exposure, treatable with better conditions and supportive care. He left them with medicines and instructions, and by the time he departed, even the sickest cattle were showing signs of improvement. You have good instincts, Miss Han, Dr. Harrison said as he was loading his wagon to leave. Most of what you were doing was exactly right. With proper feed and care, I expect you will recover most of this herd. After he left, Kellan found Lihua standing in the barn, her hand resting on the neck of one of the recovering cows, her expression distant. He approached quietly, not wanting to startle her. You did it, he said. You figured out what was wrong and you fixed it. We are going to make it, Lihua. The bank payment is due in 6 weeks, but with the timber money and the cattle recovering, we will have enough. We did it, she corrected. This only worked because you were willing to take risks and trust me. Because Y and Chen were brave enough to gamble on an uncertain future, because all of us worked together. She turned to face him, and in the dim light of the barn he saw something in her expression that made his heart beat faster. Kellan, I need to tell you something. All right. He moved closer, suddenly nervous without understanding why. When I answered your advertisement, I was running away from a life that had become unbearable. I did not expect to find a place that felt like home, or people who treated me like an equal, or work that made me feel proud. She took a breath, and he saw her hands were shaking slightly. I did not expect to start caring about whether this ranch survived beyond just my own self-interest, and I especially did not expect to start having feelings for you. The words hung in the air between them, and Kellan felt his own carefully guarded emotions rise to meet them. Over the past 2 months, Lihua had become the center of his world in a way that had nothing to do with saving the ranch, and everything to do with who she was. Fierce and intelligent and surprisingly funny when she let her guard down. He had been trying not to acknowledge his own growing feelings because she had been clear about not marrying until she decided the ranch could survive, and he had not wanted to pressure her. I have been trying not to have feelings for you, he admitted, his voice rough. Because you said we would not marry until you were sure, and I did not want to make things complicated. But Lihua, every day I watch you work and plan and transform this place, and every evening I look forward to sitting with you and talking, and I am failing pretty spectacularly at not falling for you." She smiled, and it transformed her face from beautiful to radiant. "Then we are both failing at the same thing. That seems like the kind of failure we should accept." He reached for her hand, his rough fingers closing around her smaller ones, and she did not pull away. They stood there in the barn with the sounds of cattle settling for the night around them, and Kellan felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This was not the desperate gratitude of a drowning man toward his rescuer. This was something real and chosen, something that had grown slowly through shared work and honest conversation and mutual respect. "So what do we do now?" he asked, afraid to assume anything. "Now we go tell Wai and Chen that they should start building us a proper bed frame, because I am not getting married and spending my wedding night in a bed that squeaks every time someone moves." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. "And then we go to town and find whoever performs weddings in Salida and arrange for a ceremony. And then we figure out how to make this ranch profitable enough to support all of us, because I am not spending my life barely surviving when we could thrive." He wanted to kiss her, but something held him back, some instinct that this moment should be marked with words first. "Lihua, I need you to know this is not just about the ranch anymore. I want to marry you because I love you, because I cannot imagine my life without you in it, because you make me want to be better than I am. The ranch surviving is important, but you matter more. I know." She squeezed his hand. "I would not have said anything if I thought you only wanted me as a ranch manager. I need you to know that I love you too, Kellan Bryant. I love your stubbornness and your honesty and the way you treat Wai and Chen like partners instead of servants. I love that you were brave enough to place that advertisement and desperate enough to give me a chance when other men would have turned me away." She paused, and her voice softened. "And I love that when you look at me, you see Lihua and not just a Chinese woman who does not belong here." He kissed her then, gently at first and then with growing passion as she responded, her arms wrapping around his neck and pulling him closer. It felt like coming home after a long journey, like finding something he had not known he was searching for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably go tell Wai and Chen before they wonder why we have been in the barn so long," Lihua said, her voice slightly breathless. "They probably already know. I am not exactly subtle when I look at you." He kissed her again, quickly this time. "But yes, we should go share the news and figure out how to plan a wedding in 6 weeks while also saving a ranch." The wedding took place on the first Saturday in October, a clear autumn day when the aspen trees blazed gold across the mountainsides, and the air held the crisp promise of coming winter. They had debated about where to hold the ceremony, knowing that many in Salida would object to a Chinese bride regardless of the legal right to marry. In the end, they had found an unexpected ally in Father Michael, a Catholic priest who ran a small church on the edge of town, and who believed that God's love extended to all people regardless of their origin. "I have performed weddings for Irish and Germans, for Mexicans and freed slaves, and I will happily perform one for a Chinese woman and a Colorado rancher," Father Michael had declared when they approached him. He was an elderly man with white hair and bright blue eyes that held a lifetime of conviction. "Those who object can take it up with the Almighty, and I suspect he will have some words for them about their lack of charity." The ceremony was small, attended by Wai and Chen, who wore their best clothing and stood as witnesses, and by Dr. Harrison, who had made the trip from Denver because he wanted to see the young lady who saved that cattle herd. Thomas Reeves did not attend, but his presence loomed over the day anyway because 3 of his ranch hands had been seen in town that morning, drinking heavily and making threats about teaching the China lover a lesson. Lihua wore a dress she had sewn herself, a beautiful creation that blended Chinese silk with a Western style, embroidered with tiny flowers that caught the light. Kellan wore his father's best suit, brushed clean and only slightly moth-eaten, and he felt his throat tighten when he saw her walking down the aisle of the small church. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and the fact that she had chosen him still felt like a miracle he did not deserve. Father Michael performed the ceremony in English and Latin, blessing their union with words that spoke of partnership and commitment, of choosing each other in full knowledge of life's difficulties. When Kellan slipped the simple gold band onto Lihua's finger, a ring they had purchased with money from the timber sale, his hand shook slightly. When Lihua repeated her vows, her voice was strong and clear, and he saw tears shining in her eyes that mirrored his own. "You may kiss your bride," Father Michael announced with a smile, and Kellan did, gently and reverently, aware of the small audience and the significance of the moment. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, where Chen had roasted a young steer, and Wai had somehow created dishes that tasted like home, even though Kellan had never been to China. They ate and drank and told stories, and for a few hours Kellan let himself forget about the threats and the risks and the precarious nature of their success. He danced with his wife in the front room of the house, while Wai played a fiddle he had somehow acquired, and he felt happiness so complete it was almost frightening. Late in the evening, after Dr. Harrison had departed, and Wai and Chen had diplomatically retreated to the bunkhouse, Lihua took Kellan's hand and led him upstairs to their bedroom. The bed frame Chen had built was solid and beautiful, made from pine timber with joints that would last generations, and it held a new mattress they had purchased in Salida. Someone, probably Wai, had scattered wildflowers across the quilts, and the room smelled of pine and autumn air. "Are you nervous?" Lihua asked, turning to face him in the lamplight. "Terrified," he admitted. "Not of this of us, but of everything that could still go wrong. Reeves is not going to stop trying to take this land. Winter is coming and we still do not have enough hay stored. The cattle are better, but not all of them will survive. I keep waiting for the next disaster. Then stop waiting and come here." She reached for him, pulling him close with hands that were both gentle and insistent. "We will face the disasters when they come together. Tonight we are just 2 people who chose each other, and that is enough." He kissed her, and this time there was no audience, no interruption, just the 2 of them learning each other in the lamplight. She was patient with his nervousness and fierce in her desire, and when they finally came together, it felt like sealing a promise that went deeper than the vows they had spoken in church. Afterward, they lay tangled in the new quilts, her head on his chest and his hand stroking her long hair, and Kellan thought that whatever came next, he would face it knowing he was not alone. The disaster Kellan had been fearing arrived 2 weeks later in the form of fire. He woke in the deepest part of night to the sound of horses screaming and the smell of smoke, and by the time he and Lihua reached the window, the barn was fully engulfed in flames that painted the night orange and red. They ran outside in their night clothes, shouting for Wai and Chen, who were already pouring buckets of water onto the inferno, even though it was clearly too late to save the structure. The barn burned for 3 hours, taking with it all their stored hay, most of their tools, and nearly all the winter feed they had so carefully accumulated. The only blessing was that the cattle had been in the pastures rather than locked inside, But the loss was devastating enough to potentially destroy everything they had worked for. As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins, Kellan walked through the wreckage looking for some explanation of how the fire had started. "Here," Chen called, pointing to an area near what had been the barn's entrance. Even through the ash and destruction, Kellan could see the glass remnants of broken bottles and smell the distinct odor of kerosene. This had not been an accident. This had been arson. "Reeves," he said, the name tasting like poison. "Almost certainly, but you cannot prove it." Lihua stood beside him, her face smudged with soot and her eyes hard. He made sure to have his men start the fire when no one would see them. "The law will do nothing without proof." "Then what do we do?" Kellan looked at the ruins of his father's barn, feeling rage and despair war in his chest. "We needed that hay to get the cattle through winter. We needed those tools to finish repairs before the snow comes. Without them, we are ruined. We rebuild." Lihua's voice was flat and determined. "We find more hay or we drive the cattle somewhere with better grazing. We replace the tools and we build a new barn. And we do it fast enough that Reeves realizes he cannot break us." Wai and Chen gathered around them, all four standing in the wreckage as the sun rose higher. Wai spoke in Chinese, a long stream of words that Kellan could not understand but that made Lihua nod. She translated. "Wai says in Fujian when one family had disaster, the whole village would help. He says we need to stop thinking like Americans who do everything alone and start thinking like Chinese who understand that survival requires community. He wants to go to Salada and talk to the other Chinese workers, see if anyone will help us in exchange for food or future profit shares." "That could work," Kellan said slowly. "And I could talk to some of the other ranchers. Not everyone in this valley likes Reeves. There might be men willing to lend tools or sell hay at fair prices just to spite him." They divided tasks with practiced efficiency, Lihua and Wai heading to town, while Kellan and Chen began clearing the wreckage. It was back-breaking work made harder by the emotional weight of loss, but Kellan found himself grateful for Chen's solid presence and the way the carpenter assessed the damage with professional detachment. By midday, they had cleared enough space to see what might be salvaged, and Chen had sketched a design for a new barn that would be smaller but more efficient than the old one. When Lihua and Wai returned in late afternoon, they brought unexpected reinforcements. 6 Chinese men rode with them, all of them workers from the mines who had decided that helping build a barn was better than their day off. They also brought news that Father Michael had shamed several of Salada's merchants into donating materials, reminding them loudly and publicly that Christian charity should extend to victims of arson regardless of the bride's nationality. The rebuild took 3 weeks of dawn to dusk labor, with shifts of workers rotating through as different men took time away from their mine jobs to help. The new barn rose from the ashes with stunning speed, smaller than the original but built with such care that Kellan knew it would stand for generations. Tools appeared mysteriously, left near the building site by people who never gave their names. Hay arrived from 2 different ranchers, who both claimed they had extra and would accept payment in the spring when Kellan sold his cattle. The community support was overwhelming and unexpected, and Kellan realized that while Reeves might have power and money, he had made enemies with his arrogance and greed. People were helping the Bryant ranch not just out of kindness, but as a way to strike back at a man who had lorded his success over the valley for too long. One evening during the rebuild, Thomas Reeves himself rode onto the property. Kellan saw him coming and met him in the yard, flanked by Wai and Chen who appeared silently from their work. Reeves looked at the new barn rising from the ruins of the old and something ugly twisted his expression. "You are either the luckiest fool in Colorado or too stupid to know when you are beaten," Reeves said, not bothering to dismount. "I am a man protecting what is mine," Kellan replied, keeping his voice level through sheer force of will. "If you have something to say, say it and get off my land. I am saying that fires are not the only disasters that can befall a ranch. Cattle can get sick again. Accidents can happen. The bank can be convinced to call in loans early." Reeves leaned forward in his saddle, his small eyes gleaming with malice. "You should have sold to me when I offered, Bryant. Now when I eventually take this land, and I will take it, you will get nothing. You will leave here with just that Chinese whore and whatever you can carry." Kellan moved before he consciously decided to, grabbing Reeves by his jacket and pulling him from his horse. The older man hit the ground hard, and Kellan stood over him with fists clenched, aware of Wei and Chen moving to his sides in support. "You will not speak about my wife that way. You will not threaten my property. And if anything else happens that I can connect to you, proof or no proof, I will come to your ranch and we will settle this like men." Kellan's voice was low and dangerous, and he saw fear flicker across Reeves's face before anger replaced it. "You are threatening me. You have witnesses to that threat, Bryant. I could have you arrested." Reeves climbed to his feet, brushing dust from his clothing. "And I have witnesses to your threats. Seems like we are at a standoff." Kellan stepped back, forcing himself to unclench his fists. "Leave my property. Do not come back. And know that every person in this valley who helped rebuild that barn is now watching you. You are not as powerful as you think." Reeves mounted his horse with less dignity than he had arrived, his face red with humiliation and rage. "This is not over, Bryant. Not by a long shot." He wheeled his horse and galloped away, leaving dust and tension in his wake. Lihua appeared from the house where she had been watching from the window. She walked to Kellan and took his still shaking hand in hers. That was either very brave or very foolish, probably both. He pulled her close, needing the reassurance of her presence. "I should not have lost my temper, but I could not let him say those things about you. I am not upset that you defended my honor." She leaned into him, her voice soft. "But Kellan, he is right that this is not over. He will find other ways to hurt us. We need to be smarter, not just braver." She was right, and over the next month they worked to make the ranch as secure as possible. They hired 2 more workers, both white cowboys who had no love for Reeves and were willing to work for partnership shares rather than wages. They improved their fences and installed locks on all the buildings. They documented everything: livestock numbers, property boundaries, financial transactions. Lihua insisted they open an account at a different bank in the next town over, diversifying their assets so Reeves could not pressure them through his connections at the Salida Bank. By the time winter arrived in earnest, with heavy snows that buried the valley under 3 feet of powder, the Bryant Ranch was not just surviving but thriving. The cattle herd had recovered to nearly 100 healthy animals, enough to provide a good spring calving and summer sales. The new barn stood strong and well stocked with enough hay to last through even a harsh winter. The house had been fully repaired and winterized, with new windows and a reinforced roof. More than that, the ranch had become something Kellan's father would have been proud of. A true partnership that brought together people from different backgrounds working toward a common goal. Wei had proven to be an exceptional cattleman with instincts about animal health that rivaled any veterinarian. Chen had expanded his role beyond carpentry to become the ranch's chief builder and engineer, always finding ways to improve efficiency. The 2 white cowboys, brothers named Jack and Samuel Morrison, had integrated smoothly into the operation, despite their initial skepticism about working alongside Chinese men. Christmas came with clear skies and temperatures cold enough to freeze breath in the air. Lihua insisted on celebrating even though neither she nor Y nor Chen were Christian, declaring that any excuse for a feast and gifts was worth embracing. She cooked for 2 days, creating dishes that blended Chinese and American traditions in ways that should not have worked, but somehow did. They gathered around the large table in the kitchen, all 7 of them including the Morrison brothers, and Kellan looked at the scene with wonder. "I want to say something," he announced, standing with his glass raised. Everyone looked at him with varying degrees of curiosity. "A year ago, I was alone in this house thinking that everything my father built was going to die with me. I could not see any path forward, and I was too proud and too stupid to ask for help. Then Lihua answered my advertisement, and she did not just save this ranch. She transformed it into something better than it was before. She brought people together and created a community where there had only been isolation." He looked at his wife, who was watching him with bright eyes. "Lihua, you once said that shooting stars were ancestors checking on their families. I think my father's spirit sent you to me, because you were exactly what I needed even though I did not know it. You made me brave enough to take risks and smart enough to accept help. You turned a dying ranch into a home." He raised his glass higher. "To my wife, and to everyone here who believed in us enough to gamble on this crazy venture. Thank you." They drank to the toast, and then Y stood to offer his own words in Chinese that Lihua translated. Y says that in his village in Fujian, there was a saying, "A good harvest requires good seeds, good soil, and many hands working together." He says this ranch is a good harvest because we are all seeds that found good soil in each other. He is proud to be part of this family. The word family hung in the air, and Kellan realized that was exactly what they had become. Not a traditional family by any definition society would recognize, but a family nonetheless, bound by choice and mutual respect and shared purpose. The winter passed with hard work and deep snows, but the ranch weathered it all. The cattle stayed healthy, the buildings stayed secure, and the partnership between all the workers deepened through long evenings spent around the fire telling stories and playing cards. Kellan and Lihua grew closer as well, their marriage maturing from passionate newness into something deeper and more comfortable. She taught him words in Chinese, and he taught her to play the harmonica that had belonged to his father. They planned for the spring, dreaming about expanding the herd and maybe planting an orchard on the south-facing slope behind the house. Spring came with dramatic speed, the snow melting in a rush that swelled the Arkansas River and turned the meadows green almost overnight. The cattle that had survived the winter were healthy and strong, and the spring calving brought 47 new calves that represented the future of the herd. Kellan hired 2 more workers to help with the expansion, both Chinese men recommended by Y, and the bunkhouse that had once stood empty now housed 6 men who worked with dedication and skill. In late April, a letter arrived from the bank in Salida. Kellan opened it with hands that shook, remembering the foreclosure threat that had hung over his head for so long. But the letter was not a threat. It was a notification that his loan had been paid in full, the remaining balance cleared by an anonymous benefactor. "I do not understand," Kellan said, reading the letter a 3rd time. "Who would pay off my loan? Maybe someone who saw what you built here and wanted to ensure it survived," Lihua suggested. She was kneading bread dough at the kitchen counter, her hands working the mixture with practiced rhythm. "Or maybe someone who wanted to spite Thomas Reeves by removing his leverage over your property." The mystery was solved a week later when Father Michael visited the ranch. The old priest accepted coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Kellan and Lihua, his blue eyes twinkling with secrets. "I suppose you are wondering about your loan," Father Michael said, sipping his coffee with obvious pleasure. "You," Kellan felt his jaw drop. "How could you afford to pay off a ranch loan?" "I could not, but my church could." Or rather, a fund that has been building for years through donations from people who wanted to support worthy causes in this community. Father Michael set down his cup. "When I heard Reeves was pressuring the bank to foreclose early despite your timely payments, I brought the matter to my congregation. We voted unanimously to use the fund to clear your debt. Consider it an investment in the kind of community we want to build here, one that values hard work and partnership over greed and prejudice." Lihua wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and came to sit beside Kellan. "Father Michael, we cannot accept such charity. That is too much." "It is not charity, my dear. It is investment, as I said. You will pay it back by continuing to prove that people from different backgrounds can work together successfully. You will pay it back by prospering and helping others who need support." The priest stood, preparing to leave. "And perhaps, when you have children someday, you will teach them about kindness and community, and the debt will be paid forward into the next generation." After Father Michael left, Kellan and Lihua sat in stunned silence. The weight that had pressed on Kellan's chest for 2 years, the constant fear of losing everything, had suddenly lifted. The ranch was theirs, truly and completely, with no debts hanging over them. "Children," Lihua said softly, her hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. "Kellan, there is something I need to tell you." He turned to look at her, seeing something in her expression that made his heart race. "What is it?" "I am pregnant. I have known for 2 weeks, but I wanted to be certain before telling you." She searched his face anxiously. "I know we have not talked about children, and maybe this is too soon," but he kissed her, cutting off her nervous words with lips that curved into a smile. "Are you serious? We are going to have a baby?" "Yes, probably in late November if my calculations are correct." She pulled back to study him. "You are happy about this?" Happy does not begin to cover it. He stood and pulled her up with him, spinning her in a circle that made her laugh and protest about making herself dizzy. "Lihua, this is incredible. A baby, our baby. Growing up on this ranch that we saved together." The news of the pregnancy seemed to energize everyone on the ranch. Wai and Chen took to calling Lihua Little Mother, and treated her with exaggerated care that she found both touching and frustrating. The Morrison brothers began building a cradle in their spare time, arguing constantly about the proper design. Kellan found himself planning for the future with new urgency, wanting to ensure the ranch was not just surviving but truly thriving before his child arrived. In June, he made a trip to Denver to negotiate cattle sales, bringing Jack Morrison with him for help managing the herd drive. They sold 60 head of cattle at prices that exceeded his expectations, bringing back enough money to fund improvements and provide profit shares to all the workers. More importantly, the sale established the Bryant Ranch's reputation as a source of quality livestock, and Kellan returned with contracts for future sales that would provide steady income. Thomas Reeves made one final attempt to sabotage them in July. He filed a complaint with the county claiming that Kellan was violating vagrancy laws by employing too many Chinese workers, arguing that they were taking jobs from white men and should be removed. The county officials came to investigate. 3 men in suits who looked deeply uncomfortable as they toured the ranch and interviewed the workers. Lihua handled the officials with a combination of grace and steel that left Kellan in awe. She showed them the account books proving that the ranch employed both white and Chinese workers with equal treatment. She demonstrated how the partnership model meant workers had invested interest in the ranch's success, rather than being exploited for cheap labor. She even arranged for Father Michael to provide a written statement about the ranch's contributions to the community and the church's support for their operation. The officials left looking embarrassed, and 2 weeks later the complaint was dismissed with a written statement from the county that the Bryant Ranch was operating within all legal requirements and providing valuable economic contribution to the region. Reeves did not attempt any further legal action, and Kellan heard through town gossip that the failed complaint had actually damaged Reeves's reputation more than helped it. Summer passed into autumn with the kind of peace that Kellan had stopped believing was possible. The ranch thrived, the workers were content, and Lihua grew round with their child. She refused to slow down as much as Kellan wanted her to, still managing the ranch books and directing operations even as her pregnancy advanced. Y and Chen appointed themselves her protectors, always ensuring she did not lift anything heavy or work too long in the heat. On a crisp November morning when the aspen trees had lost their leaves and the first serious snow was threatening, Lihua woke Kellan before dawn with news that the baby was coming. The midwife they had arranged to have on call rode out from Salida, a competent woman named Mrs. Patterson who had delivered half the babies in the county. Kellan was banished from the bedroom, left to pace in the kitchen while Y made endless pots of tea and Chen carved small animals from scraps of wood with nervous energy. The labor lasted through the morning and into early afternoon. Kellan wore a track in the kitchen floor with his pacing, jumping at every sound from upstairs. When he finally heard a baby's cry, thin and strong, he took the stairs 3 at a time and burst into the bedroom despite Mrs. Patterson's protests. Lihua lay in the bed looking exhausted and radiant, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, and her eyes shining with tears and joy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets, and when Kellan approached, she pulled back the fabric to reveal a perfect baby with a shock of dark hair and features that blended both their heritages into something uniquely beautiful. "A boy," Lihua said, her voice hoarse. "We have a son, Kellan." He sat on the edge of the bed, afraid to touch something so small and precious. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real. Hold him." She transferred the bundle into his arms with careful movements. "Your son needs to meet his father." The baby was impossibly light and impossibly heavy at the same time, the weight of responsibility and love pressing down on Kellan's chest until he could barely breathe. His son opened dark eyes and seemed to study him with an intensity that was probably just newborn instinct but felt like recognition. In that moment, Kellan understood what his own father must have felt: the fierce determination to protect and provide, the willingness to sacrifice anything for this tiny person who had just entered the world. "What should we name him?" Lihua asked, watching them with soft eyes. Kellan thought about his father, about the ranch that had been built with sweat and dreams, about the community that had come together to help them survive. "I would like to name him Thomas, after my father. His full name was Thomas William Bryant. But maybe we give our son a Chinese middle name, something that honors your family and your heritage." Lihua smiled, tears sliding down her cheeks. "In Chinese tradition, names have meaning and purpose. I think we should call him Thomas Ming Bryant. Ming means bright or brilliant, and I want him to grow up bringing light to the world. Thomas Ming Bryant." Kellan tested the name, liking the way it sounded. He is going to grow up knowing both sides of his heritage, both cultures. He is going to grow up on a ranch that proves different people can work together and build something amazing. Over the next weeks, the household adjusted to the new addition with surprising grace. Y carved a beautiful mobile of horses and cattle that hung over the cradle. Chen built a high chair with joints so precise it would last for generations. The Morrison brothers took turns doing extra chores so Kellan could spend more time helping Lihua with the baby. Even in the cold of early winter, the house felt warm with the presence of the newest Bryant. Christmas came again, and this time they had even more to celebrate. The ranch had ended the year with profit to share among all the partners, enough that Wei and Chen were talking about bringing their families from China. The Morrison brothers had decided to bring their father to live with them in the bunkhouse, giving the old man a comfortable retirement. New workers would be hired in the spring, both Chinese and white, continuing the partnership model that had proven so successful. On Christmas evening, after the feast and the gifts, Kellan and Lihua sat together in the rocking chair by the fireplace. Thomas Ming slept in Lihua's arms, his tiny face peaceful in the flickering firelight. The house was quiet, the workers having retreated to the bunkhouse for their own celebration, and for a moment it was just the three of them. 2 years ago, I was standing in Salada watching you step off that stagecoach, thinking you were not what I needed, Kellan said quietly. I wanted a sturdy farm wife who could work hard and not complain. Instead, I got a brilliant, fierce, beautiful woman who transformed everything about my life. And I was thinking you looked like every other desperate cowboy I had seen in San Francisco, another man who saw Chinese women as exotic novelties or cheap labor. Lihua adjusted the baby in her arms. Instead, I found a man with integrity and courage, who was willing to take risks and challenge everything his community believed about who belonged here. We saved the ranch, Kellan said. Together, we actually did it. We did more than save a ranch. We built a home and a family and a community that proves people do not have to be the same to work together. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Thomas Ming is going to grow up in a world that might not accept him because he is both Chinese and white. But he will grow up strong and loved, knowing that his parents built something beautiful from nothing, that they faced down prejudice and threats and disasters, and won. Kellan kissed her forehead, then leaned down to brush his lips across his son's soft hair. He will grow up hearing stories about how his mother saved a dying ranch and left the West speechless, about how she saw possibilities where everyone else saw only failure, about how she was brave enough to answer an advertisement and smart enough to transform a desperate gamble into lasting success. Those are good stories, Lihua smiled, but I hope we also tell him about how we fell in love slowly, through hard work and honest conversations, about how we learned to trust each other and build something together, about how love is not just passion and romance, though we had that too. Love is choosing someone every day and working together to build a life. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to coals and listening to their son's soft breathing. Outside, snow had begun to fall, covering the ranch in white that would melt in spring to feed the grass that would feed the cattle that would support their family and workers. The cycle of seasons would continue, bringing challenges and triumphs, but they would face everything together. In the years that followed, the Bryant Ranch became legendary in Colorado ranching circles. People came from other counties to see the successful partnership between Chinese and white workers, to learn the management techniques that Lihua had pioneered, to understand how a failing property had transformed into one of the most profitable operations in the region. Some visitors came with prejudice and left with their minds changed. Others came with curiosity and left with new ideas for their own ranches. Thomas Reeves eventually sold his property and moved to Kansas, unable to compete with the Bryant Ranch's success, and unwilling to live as a neighbor to people he had tried so hard to destroy. The land was purchased by a younger rancher who immediately approached Kellan about cooperative ventures, and the two ranches began working together on water management and shared grazing rights. Y and Chen did bring their families from China, and the ranch expanded to accommodate them with new housing and facilities. The Morrison brothers married local women who integrated into the ranch community. More workers joined over the years, creating a diverse operation that became a model for how different cultures could blend successfully. Father Michael presided over weddings and baptisms, celebrations and memorials, his church growing stronger with the support of the community he had helped build. Thomas Ming grew up bilingual, learning English from his father and Chinese from Y and Chen. He learned to ride before he could read, following his father through the high pastures and learning about cattle and land management. He learned to cook from his mother, both Chinese and American dishes, and to value the blend of cultures that made him who he was. When he was 5, a sister arrived, Anna Mae Bryant, named for Kellan's mother and given a Chinese middle name that meant beautiful. 2 years later, another brother, James Liang Bryant. As the children grew, so did the ranch's reputation. Lihua wrote articles for farming magazines about sustainable ranching practices and partnership labor models. Kellan served on the county board, advocating for fair treatment of immigrant workers and improved regulations for land use. Together, they hosted gatherings that brought together ranchers from across the region, sharing knowledge and building networks that strengthened the entire community. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Kellan and Lihua rode together to the high meadow where he had first explained his desperate situation a decade earlier. The ranch spread below them, buildings strong and well-maintained, cattle grazing in organized pastures, workers moving with practiced efficiency through their daily tasks. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys. The main house where their family lived, the bunkhouses where workers and their families resided, the new community building where they gathered for celebrations and meetings. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is real," Kellan said, his arm around Lihua's shoulders as they sat together on a fallen log. 10 years ago, I was alone and failing. Now look at what we built." "What we built together," Lihua corrected, leaning into him. "Never forget that this succeeded because we were partners from the beginning, because we respected each other and worked together. One person alone could not have done this." "I love you," he said, the words as true as the day he first spoke them. "I loved you when you stepped off that stagecoach looking nothing like what I expected. I loved you when you told me my hay was moldy and my management was terrible. I loved you when you were pregnant and still trying to run the entire ranch. I love you now, watching our children grow up strong and confident. I will love you forever. And I love you." She turned to kiss him, her lips warm against his in the cool mountain air. "You gave me a home when I had nothing. You treated me as an equal when the world told you I was less. You built a family with me that honors both our heritages. That is the greatest gift anyone could give." They rode back to the ranch as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Kellan of their wedding day. Thomas Ming ran to meet them, now 10 years old and tall for his age, full of questions about when he could start helping with the spring cattle drive. Anna Mae followed more slowly, carrying a doll Chen had carved for her. Little James toddled behind on uncertain legs, determined to keep up with his older siblings. The house was warm when they entered, filled with the smell of dinner cooking and the sound of laughter. Y and his wife were visiting for the evening meal, and Chen was already seated at the expanded kitchen table with his family. The Morrison brothers arrived with their wives and children, and soon the house was full of people and noise and life. Kellan stood in the doorway watching the scene, his children playing with other children who spoke both English and Chinese, workers and family blending until the distinctions hardly mattered. This was what they had built, not just a successful ranch but a real community based on mutual respect and shared purpose. This was what Lihua had made possible with her courage and intelligence, her willingness to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. As they sat down to eat, the long table crowded with people of different backgrounds all brought together by this place, Kellan caught Lihua's eye across the room. She smiled at him, that same fierce smile he had first seen in the barn when she told him they could save the ranch. He smiled back, his heart full of gratitude and love and wonder at the life they had created. The story of the cowboy who begged a Chinese bride to save his dying ranch, and what she did that left the West speechless, was not just about one dramatic rescue. It was about the slow, steady work of building something real and lasting. It was about two people from completely different worlds choosing to trust each other and work together despite all the reasons they should not. It was about love growing from respect and partnership, about family being defined by choice rather than blood, about community being stronger than prejudice. And as the years continued to pass, as Thomas Ming eventually took over management of the ranch with his siblings as partners, as grandchildren arrived to play in the same meadows where Kellan had played as a child, the story became legend. People told it differently depending on who was speaking. Some emphasized the business innovations, others the cultural integration, still others the simple love story at its heart. But the truth was simpler and more complex than any legend could capture. It was the truth of two people who found each other when they most needed finding, who chose each other despite every obstacle, who built something beautiful together through hard work and honest partnership. It was the truth that love can cross any divide if people are brave enough to try, that community can be built anywhere if people are willing to respect each other's differences. That success comes not from individual achievement, but from working together toward common goals. The Bryant Ranch stood for generations as a testament to these truths, and the descendants of that desperate cowboy and brave Chinese bride carried forward the lessons they had learned. The West might have been speechless at first, surprised by what Lihua accomplished and how she transformed a dying ranch into a thriving success. But eventually, the speechlessness gave way to understanding, then to admiration, and finally to imitation as other ranches adopted the practices and principles that had proven so successful. And through it all, the story at the heart of everything remained. Two people who found each other against all odds, who chose love over fear, who built a family and a community that proved different worlds could blend into something stronger and more beautiful than either alone. That was what Lihua did that left the West speechless. She did not just save a ranch. She proved that partnership, respect, and love could overcome any obstacle, could transform failure into success, could build bridges across cultures and create something that would last for generations. As Kellan and Lihua grew old together, their children grown and building their own families, they would often ride back to that high meadow to watch the sunset over the ranch they had saved and built and loved. And every time, Kellan would remember standing in Salida watching a small Chinese woman step off a stagecoach, thinking she was not what he needed. Every time he would marvel at how wrong he had been, and how grateful he was that she had been brave enough to stay, to fight, to love him back, to build this impossible, beautiful life together. That was the real story, not just what she did, but what they did together, and what it meant for everyone who came after.